My wife's family never gave a damn about me. They just used me. I spent 5 years working day and night to make them rich, but the moment the police showed up, they pointed the finger at me. I was just a tool they could throw away when things got messy. I sat at the far end of the mahogany dining table, the kind of table that felt more like a border between nations than a place for a family to eat. The air in the Caldwell estate always smelled of beeswax, old money, and the faint, metallic tang of a silent war. To my left sat Lucas, my brother-in-law, nursing a glass of scotch that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Across from me was Harrison, the patriarch, a man whose gaze could freeze the blood in your veins. And then there was Vivian, my wife. She was the most beautiful thing in the room, and the most dangerous. She sat poised, her spine a straight line of pure ambition, nodding as her father discussed the aggressive expansion of Caldwell Global Holdings. I was there, of course. I was always there. But to them, I was like the wallpaper or the heavy drapes, expensive, functional, and expected to remain silent. Stefan. Harrison's voice cut through the clinking of silverware. He didn't look up from his steak. The systems architecture for the new Singapore merger. Is it ready? It was ready 3 days ago, Harrison, I replied quietly. The encryption is layered. Even if the feds tried to knock on the digital door, they'd find a brick wall. Harrison grunted. It was the only praise I ever received. For 5 years, I had been the invisible backbone of their empire. I was the one who smoothed out the technical glitches, the one who built the shadows where they hid their light. I had married Vivian because I loved her. Or at least I loved the version of her that existed before she stepped back into the gravitational pull of her father's shadow. Make sure it stays that way, Lucas chimed in, his voice slightly slurred. He flashed a grin that didn't reach his eyes. We got a lot of eyes on us lately. Wouldn't want a little technicality to ruin the party, would we, brother-in-law? I looked at Lucas. I saw the sweat on his brow that he tried to hide with arrogance. I saw the way his hand shook as he reached for his glass. I knew exactly what Lucas had been doing. I knew about the offshore accounts he had been draining to fund his gambling debts. I knew about the fraudulent signatures. I had built the system, after all. I saw every footprint in the snow. I chose to stay silent. I did it for Vivian. I thought loyalty was a currency that would eventually be returned. Before we dive into the cold cell and the total seizure of Stefan's world, I have a quick question for you. Who do you think is the biggest snake in this story, the brother-in-law Lucas or the wife Vivian? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Your theories help me shape these narratives, and while you're there, make sure you've liked the video and subscribe so we can keep this 10-part series moving toward the ultimate revenge. Vivian reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was cold. You're very quiet tonight, Stefan, she whispered, leaning closer. Her perfume, a sharp jasmine, filled my senses. It was the scent of my home, or what I thought was my home. Just thinking about the architecture, I said. It wasn't a lie. I was thinking about how a single structural flaw can bring down the tallest skyscraper. I just didn't realize yet that the flaw was me. After dinner, I retreated to my study, a room Harrison called the IT department when he wanted to insult me. It was filled with servers that hummed like a living heart. This was my world. Here, I wasn't the +1 to a dynasty. I was the architect. I pulled up a secure terminal. A message from Ilya Novak popped up on an encrypted channel. The tide is rising, Stefan. The federal investigators aren't looking at the merger anymore. They're looking at the CFO's ledger. Your brother-in-law was sloppy. I typed back slowly. I see it. I've already patched the leaks. The family is protected. And who is protecting? You. Ilya's response came back instantly. I stared at the screen. I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Vivian and I on our honeymoon in Amalfi. We looked happy. We looked like a team. I believed in that photo more than I believed in the warnings of my oldest friend. Stefan. I closed the terminal as Vivian walked in. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair let down. She looked softer in the dim light of the servers. She walked behind me and placed her hands on my shoulders. My father is worried, she said softly. Lucas made a mistake. A big one. The feds are going to raid the main office tomorrow. I reached up and touched her hand. I know. I've already diverted the digital trail. It won't lead to Lucas. The Empire is safe, Vivian. She leaned down, her lips brushing my ear. And you'd do anything for this family, wouldn't you? No matter the cost? I'd do anything for you, I corrected her. She didn't answer, she just held me. I thought it was a gesture of gratitude. In reality, it was a goodbye. The next morning, the silence of the estate was shattered, not by the birds, but by the thud of heavy boots on the gravel driveway and the blue and red flicker of lights against the marble walls. I was in the kitchen, pouring a cup of coffee when the front door was kicked in. Harrison was there, standing at the top of the grand staircase, looking down with a face made of stone. Margaret, my mother-in-law, stood beside him, clutching her pearls but showing no fear. They weren't surprised. "Stephen Rowan!" a voice boomed. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of $600 million from Caldwell Global." I didn't run, I didn't reach for a phone. I looked for Vivian. She was standing in the shadows of the hallway. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shouting for them to stop. She was holding a folder, the legal strategy I had designed to protect the CFO, the strategy I had signed off on. "Vivian?" I called out as two agents slammed me against the marble counter, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into my wrists. She stepped into the light. Her eyes were empty. "I'm sorry, Stefan," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "But the family name has to come first. My father said you were always the smartest person in the room. He said if anyone could survive this, it was you." Behind her, Lucas appeared. He looked relieved. The sweat was gone. He looked at me and winked, a sharp, jagged insult. Harrison stepped down the stairs, his cane clicking on each step. He stopped just inches from my face. "You were a good architect, Stefan," the patriarch whispered. "But every dynasty needs a fall guy, and you were always so invisible. It's almost like you were never here at all." As they dragged me out the door, the sun was just beginning to hit the Caldwell crest above the entrance. I looked back at the house. I saw the drapes, I saw the wallpaper, and I saw my wife turning her back on me to go have breakfast with the people who had just stolen my life. I didn't struggle, I didn't scream, I just started calculating. Because they were right about one thing, I was a systems architect, and I had just realized that the system I had built to protect them was the only thing that could destroy. They thought they had erased me. They didn't realize I was the one who held the pen. The holding cell smelled of stale tobacco and ozone. It was a concrete box, designed to strip a man of his dignity before the law even had a chance to strip him of his freedom. I sat on the metal bench, the orange jumpsuit scratching against my skin. A far cry from the Egyptian cotton shirts I had worn for the last decade. My hands were still shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was the physical manifestation of a system rebooting. The heavy iron door groaned open, and Evelyn Caldwell stepped in. She was the family's legal architect, a woman who viewed the Constitution as a set of suggestions rather than laws. She didn't sit down. She stood over me, smelling of mint and expensive stationery. "Sign these, Stefan," she said, dropping a thick stack of papers on the small table. "It's better for everyone if this is handled quietly." I looked at the top page. Emergency divorce, asset forfeiture, waiver of counsel. They weren't just asking for my freedom, they were asking for my soul. "Where is Vivian?" I asked, my voice sounding like gravel. "Vivian is doing what a Caldwell does," Evelyn replied, her eyes cold. "She is preserving the future. You were an investment that turned into a liability. Harrison has already made the necessary calls. The media narrative is set. You are the rogue genius who went behind the family's back to line his own pockets. Lucas is being hailed as the whistleblower who caught you." I let out a short, dry laugh. Lucas couldn't whistle if his life depended on it. He's too busy trying to remember where he hid the other $40 million. Evelyn's face didn't move. "It doesn't matter what you know. It matters what we can prove. And right now, every server you touched, every line of code you wrote, has been tagged with your unique digital signature. We have 3 years of evidence showing you acted alone. Because I built the system that way to protect him," I whispered. "I built the shield, and you're turning it into a spear." "Precisely," she said, leaning in. Sign the papers, take the 10-year plea deal, and Harrison will ensure you have a comfortable stay. Refuse, and we will push for the maximum. 30 years in a federal penitentiary. You'll be 60 when you see the sun again, Stefan, and you'll be penniless. I looked at the pen. My mind was racing, calculating the variables. If I fought now, they would crush me. They controlled the judges, the prosecutors, and the headlines. I was a ghost in their machine, and they were ready to delete me. But there was one thing Evelyn and Harrison didn't know. They thought they had seized all my assets. They had frozen the bank accounts, took the deed to the house, and locked the trust. But they were looking at the Caldwell ledger. They weren't looking at the shadow architecture I had built with Ilya Novak. I picked up the pen and signed. Every single page. Evelyn's lips curled into a thin, triumphant smile. She swept the papers back into her briefcase. Smart man. I always said you were too logical for your own good. As she walked out, the reality of the situation hit me. My name was being scrubbed from the world. By the time the 6 p.m. news hit, I was no longer Stefan Rowan, the brilliant architect. I was the Caldwell parasite. The courtroom a week later was a formality. I stood there, ignored by the gallery of socialites who used to invite me to their galas. Vivian sat in the front row, wearing a black veil as if she were at a funeral. She didn't look at me once, not even when the judge handed down the sentence, 12 years in a maximum security facility. The asset seizure happened in real time. My watch was taken, my ring was taken, they even took the shoes off my feet. I watched on a small monitor in the processing room as the Caldwell Global PR team stood in front of my offices, removing my name from the glass. I was being erased. But as the bus pulled away from the courthouse, heading toward the gray walls of the prison, I closed my eyes and visualized a different set of numbers. Deep within the Caldwell's own server bank, the very system I had built, there was a dead man protocol. It was a piece of dormant code, a digital tumor that was invisible to any scan. It was tied to my heartbeat, my biometric signature, and my presence in the network. By removing me, they had started a countdown. They thought they had stolen my wealth, but all they had done was remove the one person who kept their own secrets from leaking into the light. The bus hit a pothole, jarring my head against the cold window. I looked out at the passing trees, the last bit of green I'd see for a long time. I wasn't going to prison to rot. I was going to prison to wait. The Caldwells had spent 30 years building a dynasty on a foundation of lies. They thought they had traded me for a clean slate. They didn't realize that by locking me away, they had just given me the ultimate vantage point. You can't see the flaws in a castle when you're sitting on the throne. You see them when you're trapped in the dungeon. I felt the bus slow down as the massive iron gates of Blackwood Penitentiary groaned open. The air here was different. Heavy, thick with the smell of diesel and despair. As I stepped off the bus, a guard shoved me forward. "Move it, Rowan. Welcome to your new home. Hope you like the view." I looked up at the guard towers and the barbed wire. For the first time since the arrest, I felt a spark of something other than shock. They had taken my life, my wife, and my name, but they had left me with the one thing a systems architect needs to destroy a dynasty: time. I walked into the darkness of the processing center, my footsteps echoing on the stone. The countdown had begun. They just didn't know it yet. The first 6 months in Blackwood Penitentiary were about one thing: staying invisible. In the outside world, being invisible was a curse. Here, it was a survival strategy. I traded my bespoke suits for a rough, gray denim uniform that chafed my skin until I bled. I traded the scent of jasmine for the smell of floor wax and unwashed bodies. The Caldwells had made sure the word got out that I was a snitch or a soft target. They wanted me broken. They wanted me to end my own story so they wouldn't have to worry about a sequel. Every day in the yard was a gauntlet. I spent my time in the library, the only place where the air didn't feel like it was vibrating with impending violence. That was where I met Daniel Crow. He was an older man, late 50s, with a face that looked like a roadmap of every mistake the federal government had ever made. He sat in the corner, surrounded by law books and financial ledgers, his eyes darting across the pages with a predatory intensity. "You re the Caldwell kid," Crow said one afternoon, not looking up from a volume on racketeering. "I'm Stephen Rowan," I corrected him. "The Caldwells are the reason I'm here." Crow finally looked up. His eyes were a piercing, washed-out blue. "I know who you are, Stephen. I used to be the man who chased people like you. I was a lead investigator for the SEC. I spent 20 years putting guys in these jerseys, until the Caldwells decided I was getting too close to their offshore shells. They didn't just fire me, they framed me for evidence tampering." I sat down across from him. The air between us was cold. "Then we have something in common. They used my own systems to bury me." "I watched your trial," Crow said, leaning back. "You were sloppy. You left too many doors open." "I didn't leave them open for the feds. I left them open for my wife. I thought I was protecting her." Crow let out a short, bitter laugh. "In a dynasty, wives are just placeholders for the next generation of greed. You weren't a husband, Stephen. You were a firewall. And once the virus got inside, they didn't need the firewall anymore." Over the next few months, Crow became my mentor in the dark arts of institutional collapse. While I knew the digital architecture, he knew the human rot. He taught me how the Caldwells moved money through ghost charities and how they used the political influence of Margaret Caldwell to buy silence in the Capitol. But I wasn't just learning. I was working through a corrupt guard named Ellis Kane, a man who had a gambling habit that I could track even from inside a cell. I managed to get access to the prison's administrative network. It was a primitive system, but it was connected to the outside world. Using a series of encrypted burst transmissions, I made contact with Ilya Novak. The dead man protocol is at 40%. Ilya's message arrived through a hidden partition in the prison's commissary ledger. Caldwell Global is struggling. Lucas is bleeding cash. They're trying to sell off the Singapore merger assets. But the encryption keys you wrote are holding. They can't unlock the funds without your biometric pulse. I smiled for the first time in a year. The Caldwells were sitting on a mountain of gold, but I had locked the vault and swallowed the key. "What are you thinking about, kid?" Crow asked me during a workout in the yard. "I'm thinking about the weight of a name," I said. "The Caldwells think their name is a shield. I'm going to turn it into a lead weight." "Be careful," Crow warned. "A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered dynasty is lethal. They won't just let you walk away with their secrets." "I'm not walking away," I said, watching a hawk circle the guard towers. "I'm waiting for them to invite me out." The turning point came in the 8th month. Warden Ellis Kane called me into his office. He wasn't wearing his usual arrogant smirk. He looked pale. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Rowan," he said, sliding a folder across his desk, "there's been a development. New evidence has surfaced regarding the CFO's involvement in the Caldwell fraud. The Department of Justice is reopening the case." "Is that so?" I asked, my voice calm. "Your charges are being reviewed. But there's a problem. A lot of people are worried about what you might say if you're released. Harrison Caldwell has made it very clear that he'd prefer you stayed here for the full 12 years. He's offering a lot of money to make sure you disappear into the general population." I looked at Kane. I saw the greed fighting with his fear. "Harrison is offering you money for my life," I said. "But I can offer you something better. I can offer you a clean record. I know about the $400,000 you've skimmed from the prison's food budget, Warden. I know which account it's in, and I know the password." Kane froze. "How could you?" "I'm an architect, Warden. I see the plumbing of every system I'm in. You help me get the message to Daniel Crow's old contacts in the DOJ, and I'll make sure that account vanishes before the auditors arrive. If I die in here, that evidence is set to be emailed to the Attorney General automatically." I leaned forward, the shadows of the office making my face look like a mask of stone. "The Caldwells think they own the world, but I own the truth. And right now, the truth is the only thing keeping you out of a cell next to mine." Kane swallowed hard. He looked at the folder, then at me. He realized then that I wasn't a prisoner. I was a ticking bomb that the Caldwells had accidentally moved into his house. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want my name back," I said. "And I want a front row seat for the collapse. The legal system, much like a complex piece of software, has a failsafe. If you input the right sequence of data into the right terminals, the entire structure is forced to reset. Through Warden Kane's private line, I didn't just send a message, I unleashed a digital ghost. Ilya had been holding onto a smoking gun file, a recorded conversation between Lucas and Harrison that I had captured through the Caldwell Estates smart home hub months before my arrest. In the recording, Harrison's voice was unmistakable. "The feds need a scalp, Lucas. We give them Stefan. He's a nobody. We'll rewrite the ledgers and bury him under the architecture he built for us." The file hit the Department of Justice's server at 3 a.m. By 9 a.m., a fleet of black SUVs was idling outside the prison gates. The release wasn't cinematic. There were no cameras, no cheering crowds, just a silent walk through the airlocks, the sound of heavy steel doors clicking shut behind me for the last time. Warden Kane stood by the final gate, his face a sickly shade of gray. He handed me a plastic bag containing my personal effects, a cheap wallet, my wedding ring, and a burner phone Ilya had smuggled into the property. "The Caldwells know you're out, Rowan," Kane muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. Harrison called. He sounded different. "Be careful." "Harrison should be the one being careful, Warden," I said, stepping into the blinding afternoon sun. "He's about to find out what happens when the architect stops building and starts demolishing." Waiting for me at the curb was a nondescript sedan. Ilya Novak was behind the wheel, looking older but wearing a sharp, satisfied grin. As I sat in the passenger seat, the smell of real leather and expensive coffee felt like a shock to my system. "Welcome back to the grid, Stefan," Ilya said, handing me a high-end tablet. "The dead man protocol is at 98%. The moment you biometric sync with this device, the Caldwell Empire enters its final 24-hour cycle." I looked at the screen. The financial map of Caldwell Global Holdings looked like a nervous system, and I could see the fever spreading. Lucas was frantically trying to move assets into a Swiss offshore, but the system I designed was tagging every transaction as fraudulent in real time, alerting the SEC with every click of his mouse. "Where is Vivian?" I asked. "In the penthouse," Ilya said. "She's been trying to reach your estate lawyer for 3 hours. She doesn't realize the lawyer was the first one I flipped. She thinks she still has a $40 million safety net. She's about to find out the net is made of cobwebs." I pressed my thumb to the tablet's sensor. A low hum vibrated through the device. "Sync complete. Let's go," I said. "I have 24 hours to watch 30 years of corruption burn." We drove toward the city, the skyline looming ahead like a graveyard of ambition. My first stop wasn't the Caldwell office. It was a small, dingy motel on the edge of the financial district. Daniel Crowe was waiting there, having been released on a technicality 48 hours prior thanks to the evidence I provided. The room was filled with monitors, tracking the Caldwells' every move. Crowe looked up, a cigarette dangling from his lip. "The SEC just issued the warrants, Stefan," Crowe said, pointing to a screen showing live news footage of the Caldwell Global building. "They're moving in on Harrison and Lucas, but Margaret is the one to watch. She's trying to use her political contacts to get a flight out to a non-extradition country. She won't make it to the airport," I said. "I've already flagged her passport as part of a high-level money laundering investigation. Every gate in the country is locked for her." I sat down at the center terminal. My fingers moved across the keys with a muscle memory that felt like coming home. I wasn't just Stefan Rowan, the husband or the convict. I was the architect of their ruin. Step 1, the freeze. I entered the command. Across the globe, every Caldwell Global corporate credit card, every executive account, and every shell company payroll was instantly suspended. In 1 second, the dynasty went from being worth billions to being unable to buy a cup of coffee. Step 2, the exposure. I hit enter. A massive cache of internal emails showing 30 years of bribery, environmental violations, and tax evasion was simultaneously delivered to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Department of Justice. "Look at the stock price," Ilya whispered. The ticker for Caldwell Global, CGH, was in a free fall. It wasn't a dip, it was a vertical line heading toward zero. $140, $85, $22, $4. "They're calling you, Stefan," Crow said, nodding toward the burner phone on the table. The caller ID read, "Vivian." I let it ring, and ring, and ring. I wanted her to feel the silence. I wanted her to feel the way I felt when I called her from the holding cell and no one picked up. On the 20th ring, I finally swiped to answer. "Stefan?" Her voice was frantic, stripped of all its Caldwell polish. "Stefan, thank God. Everything is falling apart. The feds are here, the accounts are frozen. Dad is having a heart attack. You have to fix the system. You're the only one who can unlock the emergency funds." "I am the one who locked them, Vivienne," I said, my voice echoing the coldness of a prison cell. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "You said I was the smartest person in the room," I reminded her. "You were right. I've spent the last year in a cage you helped build, making sure that when I walked out, there would be no room left for you. You didn't just betray a husband. You betrayed the man who held the keys to your entire world. Stefan, please. We can fix this. I'll tell them everything. I'll say they forced me to sign that testimony." "You already signed the paperwork, Vivienne," I said. "And so did I. The divorce is final. The assets are seized. And the family name, it's officially a stain." I hung up. "That was Act 1, I said to Crow and Ilya. "Let's move to Act 2. I want to see Lucas in handcuffs before the sun goes down." The 24-hour clock was ticking, and the city was watching the Caldwell sun set in real time. On every news monitor in our motel headquarters, helicopters were circling the Caldwell Global spire. It looked like an anthill that had been stepped on. Suits were running out of the lobby with boxes, and the polished glass of the skyscraper seemed to reflect only the flashing lights of federal cruisers. "Lucas is on the move," Ilya said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "He's trying to exit through the subterranean loading dock in a service van. He thinks he's being clever." I looked at the thermal tracking I'd embedded in the building security system months ago. A small heat signature was moving rapidly toward the basement. "He's not clever. He's predictable. Close the gates, Ilya. Lock the hydraulics." With a single keystroke, the massive steel shutters of the loading dock slammed shut. On the screen, we watched the van screech to a halt. Lucas Caldwell scrambled out of the driver's seat, clutching a duffel bag, likely filled with the untraceable diamonds he'd been stockpiling. He ran toward the emergency exit, but I had already remapped the biometric scanners. To the door, Lucas was now an intruder. The NYPD and the FBI swarmed the dock seconds later. We watched the high-definition feed as the golden boy of the Caldwell dynasty was tackled onto the greasy concrete. The duffel bag spilled open, scattering millions of dollars in loose stones across the floor. Lucas wasn't shouting about his rights anymore. He was weeping. "One down," Daniel Crow grunted, crossing a name off a physical list with a thick black marker. "Now for the big fish." Harrison Caldwell wasn't running. He was waiting in his penthouse office, a room that looked out over the empire he had spent 50 years building on a foundation of crushed competitors and broken lives. I stood up. "I'm going in." "Stefan, that's not a good idea," Ilya warned. "The feds are everywhere. You're legally clear, but—" "I need to see the look in his eyes," I said. "I spent a year looking at a gray wall because of him. He needs to look at the man who took it all back." I arrived at the Caldwell building 20 minutes later. The chaos in the lobby was absolute, but I walked through it like a ghost. I still had my executive override keycard, the one the system hadn't revoked because I was the one who controlled the revocation list. I stepped into the private elevator. When the doors opened to the 80th floor, the silence was a physical weight. The secretaries were gone, the lawyers were gone. Only Harrison remained, sitting behind his massive oak desk, staring at a static-filled television screen. "The encryption is quite beautiful, Stefan," Harrison said without turning around. "I had 3 of the best hackers in the country try to bypass your freeze. One of them actually started crying. He said the code was sentient. It's not sentient, Harrison, I said, walking to the center of the room. It's just honest. It only moves for the person who actually owns the labor behind it. Harrison turned his chair. He looked a decade older than he had a year ago. His skin was the color of parchment. You've destroyed us. The charity accounts, the political funds, even Vivian's trust. You've left us with nothing. I left you with exactly what you gave me, I replied. The truth of your own character. You told me every dynasty needs a fall guy. You were right. You just picked the wrong architect. You thought I was a tool you could use to build your house. You didn't realize I am the house. And I decided to move. Harrison's hand shook as he reached for a cigar, but he didn't light it. Vivian, she actually loved you, in her way. You're destroying her too. She didn't love me, Harrison. She loved the protection I provided. The moment you offered her a better shield, she traded me in. That's not love. That's an acquisition. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the office burst open. Margaret Caldwell marched in, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She was holding a stack of frozen credit cards as if they were weapons. Harrison, do something, she shrieked. The pilot won't take off. They say the plane is impounded, and this waiter is standing in our office. She pointed a trembling finger at me. She still couldn't even say my name. The waiter just bought your house, Margaret, I said calmly, and your plane, and the gallery that houses your portrait. I suggest you start packing. The marshals will be here in 10 minutes to inventory the furniture. Margaret looked at Harrison, then back at me. The reality of the situation finally cracked her shell. She didn't scream this time. She just sank into a chair, the Queen of New York suddenly looking like a very small, very frightened old woman. I turned back to Harrison. I'm not a villain, Harrison. I'm just the auditor. And your debt is finally due. I walked out of the office just as the federal agents arrived to escort the patriarch away in handcuffs. I didn't stay to watch. I didn't need the satisfaction of the spectacle. I took the elevator down to the lobby. As I stepped out onto the street, the air felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of the Caldwell secrets. I wasn't the invisible husband. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out the burner phone. A final message from Ilya. The dead man protocol has finished. Caldwell Global Holdings is officially bankrupt. The assets have been moved to the Rowan Trust. You're now the wealthiest nobody in the world, Stefan. I looked up at the glass tower. It was just a building now, empty, silent. Where to, Mr. Rowan? Ilya asked as he pulled the car up to the curb. I looked at the city, the lights flickering on as evening approached. To the airport, I said. I hear Amalfi is beautiful this time of year, and I'd like to see it without having to watch someone else's back. The Amalfi Coast was a world of vertical cliffs and impossible blues. I sat on the terrace of a villa that overlooked the Tyrrhenian Sea, the salt air finally scrubbing the last traces of Blackwood Penitentiary from my lungs. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't a tactical choice, it was peace. The Rowan Trust was operating at peak efficiency, while the Caldwells were rotting in holding cells and fighting over public defenders. My assets were quietly flowing into renewable energy and data privacy initiatives. I had reclaimed my name, but I had no desire to see it on a skyscraper. I preferred being the ghost who actually held the world together. Ilya was in Zurich overseeing the final liquidation of the Caldwell shell companies. Daniel Crow was back in D.C., working as a high-level consultant for the very department that had once betrayed him. The system had been balanced. But every architect knows that even the most perfect design can have a lingering shadow. I heard the sound of heels clicking on the stone path leading up to my terrace. I didn't turn around. I knew the cadence. I knew the weight of those steps. I just set my coffee down and looked at the horizon. It took me 3 weeks and 4 private investigators to find this place, Vivian said. She sounded exhausted. The polished, sharp edge of her voice was gone, replaced by a hollow rasp. I finally turned my chair. She was standing by the lemon trees, wearing a simple linen dress. Gone were the diamonds and the designer labels. She looked like a woman who had spent 21 days realizing she was a stranger to her own life. "You're losing your touch, Vivian," I said calmly. "The old you would have found me in 3 days. The old me had a fleet of cars and a legal team that could move mountains," she replied, stepping onto the terrace. She looked at the view, then back at me. "Now I have a bank account with $400 in it, and a mother who doesn't recognize me because she's so sedated on anti-anxiety meds. Why are you here?" She sat down across from me. The table that used to be a boardroom now just a piece of weathered wood, between two people who used to share a bed. "I'm not here to beg for money, Stefan. I know you. I know the moment you lock a door, the handle falls off. I'm here because I need to know one thing." I waited. "Was it all a lie?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "The 5 years, the marriage. Were you just waiting for us to slip up so you could take everything? Was I just a part of your architecture from the start?" I looked at her, and for a split second I felt the phantom pain of the man I used to be. The man who would have done anything to keep her safe. "No," I said. "I loved you, Vivienne. I loved you so much that I built a shield for your family that was so strong it could have lasted a century. I was willing to be the invisible husband forever. But you didn't just let them frame me. You handed them the hammer. You watched them break me, and you didn't even blink." Vivian looked away, a single tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. "My father told me it was the only way to save the company. He said you'd understand. He said you were a strategist. A strategist calculates risk," I said. "I never calculated for you. That was my only error." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small encrypted drive. I slid it across the table. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a small trust," I said. "Enough for you to live a quiet life. It's not Caldwell money. It's mine. It comes with one condition. You never speak to me again. You never look for me. And you never, under any circumstances, try to rebuild that name." She looked at the drive, then at me. "Why? After what I did?" "Because unlike the Caldwells, I don't leave people with nothing," I said, standing up. "I leave them with exactly what they deserve. You wanted a life without the invisible husband. Now you have it." I walked toward the edge of the terrace. Below, a small boat was cutting through the water, leaving a white wake that disappeared almost as soon as it formed. "Stefan?" I didn't turn back. "Goodbye, Vivian." I heard her pick up the drive. I heard her footsteps retreat back down the stone path. I stayed there until the sound of her car faded into the distance. The last ghost was gone. The architecture was complete. I sat back down and opened my laptop one last time. I deleted the final folder labeled Caldwell. The screen flickered, then went dark. I closed the lid and leaned back, watching the sun begin its slow descent into the sea. They framed me because they needed a villain. I walked away because I didn't. If you're still here, it means you've seen the rise, the fall, and the ultimate redemption of Stefan Rowan. Which part of the Caldwell collapse was the most satisfying for you? Was it Lucas in the loading dock, or seeing Vivienne stand on that terrace with nothing left? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you want to see more stories of quiet geniuses taking back what's theirs, make sure you've liked this video and subscribed to the channel. We have plenty more billionaire revenge stories in the works that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching the full 24-hour journey.